By the age of 17, I had a black belt in karate. I can still do a roundhouse kick to the head. Well, not in this dress. People considered me courageous because I wouldn't hesitate to defend myself physically. What's taken me a lifetime to develop is the skills and the courage to use my voice. Only 18 months ago, I'm attending a networking event for purpose-driven leaders. And when I walk in, I notice there's two men standing in the middle of the room having a casual conversation. So I walk right up and I ask if I can join them. And they say, of course. And one of the men asks what I do. And I share that I create scalable women's leadership and mentoring programs. And he looks me right in the eyes and he says, I hope you don't find this offensive, but I love working with women. You should see how hot my assistant is. Did I mention I can still do a roundhouse kick to the head? With these exact words, I realize that he does not see women as his equal. We are excluded from his vision of what an executive could be. Now, being the confident woman that I am, whose job it is to literally diffuse bias, empower women, and promote inclusion, I disrupt this exclusionary behavior with a powerful, I do find that offensive. And if you have time after today's event, I'd like to speak to you about that more in private. Of course, that's how it went. Except, it didn't. Instead, I froze. Even worse, I laughed awkwardly, and then I booked it to the bathroom to get out of the room as quickly as possible. And that's when the shame sunk in. My devastation. And to be clear, my devastation had very little to do with him and everything to do with me. You see, I had an opportunity to disrupt exclusionary behavior, and instead, I stayed silent. The repercussion? Silence is often mistaken for acceptance. And now he's probably going to do it again. I wish I could say that this was the first time I stayed silent, but it wasn't. This was my default behavior whenever I felt excluded. What's your default behavior when you feel excluded? How do you respond when you're not invited to lunch? Or when you're interrupted twice in a meeting? Or you overhear someone making fun of another person? After that situation, I made a promise that I would disrupt exclusionary behavior and never be silent again. It wouldn't be long until I had an opportunity to test my promise. About 6 months later, I'm invited to attend a thought leader summit, where the editor-in-chief of a global media company was the keynote speaker. It was pretty clear from the beginning that he had a political opinion to share. And he started off his presentation with a joke about a prior president. And he said, Mr. President had his indiscretions. The majority of the audience laughed, but I sunk in my chair, and so did a few others at my table. He continued to bring up this president because he felt like he did a really great job stimulating the economy and making people money. And because of that, people were more forgiving of his sins. And the parallel was that if our current president could stimulate the economy and make people money, maybe they'd be more forgiving of his sins too. But I kept thinking to myself, like, what sins is he referring to? Is he trying to say that any sin, including disrespectful behavior towards women, is forgivable with enough economic growth? The more I thought about it, the more I felt like he had no idea how his message could be misconstrued as exclusionary, and somebody should tell him. And that person was going to be me. Well, I tried to talk myself out of it. I mean, who am I? Why would he care what I think? Am I sabotaging my career because of it? But I had that feeling in my stomach, that anxious feeling that got stronger and stronger, and I took those cues as my body telling me that this was too important to brush off. So I grabbed a pencil and I immediately started writing on the hotel notepad, what was it about what he said specifically that made me feel excluded? And how can I say this to him in a way that'll be respectful and won't make him feel like he's being attacked, so he has the greatest opportunity to hear me? I wrote it out word for word, refining my approach, and now I'm hoping I get a chance to speak with him. At the end of the event, I noticed that he's graciously sticking around to let people come up and ask questions and talk to him, so I purposefully get in the back of the line. And as my turn inches closer, I almost pass out. But I took a deep breath, and my brain began to thaw, and I reached my hand out to shake his, and I said, I want to thank you for your keynote presentation and all of your innovative ideas. And there were a couple of comments that I'd like to get your feedback on, if you wouldn't mind. And he said, yes, of course. And I said, well, there were a couple of comments that rubbed me and a few others in the audience the wrong way, and I want to bring them to your attention because I do not think it was your intention. And then I paused and curiously listened. And he said, oh my gosh, please tell me, what did I say? And I said, well, I brought up the indiscretion joke, coupled with the deeper overall message of disrespectful behavior being forgivable with enough economic growth. And then I paused. And he immediately interjected. He was like, no, I meant growth dissolves political sins, not sexist sins. I'm relieved. But now he's utterly in shock, and he had this remorseful look on his face. So I calmly reaffirmed, I know, that's why I wanted to say something, because I figured that was not your intention, and I don't want others to get the wrong message. He thanked me, we shook hands, and we both walked away enlightened. When I got back to work, though, I kept waiting for an email to come in that said my career was over, but luckily that didn't happen. What did happen was I finally realized that the success of our women's leadership and mentoring programs were completely dependent on how inclusive the culture was. It didn't matter how empowered women felt if men felt excluded in the process. So we immediately began working on a new program for all genders called Inclusion 360 to instill the 6 traits of an inclusive leader. And one of the modules focuses on the daily habits of being a change agent for inclusion, which includes disrupting exclusionary behavior following these 4 steps. Step 1, ask if you can give them some feedback. 2, clearly and specifically state what was said or done and why it was exclusionary to you and potentially others. 3, give them the benefit of the doubt, that they were unaware that their actions or their words were exclusionary. Now, this might be the hardest step for most of us, but it's the most important because the next step won't work without it. And step 4 is to curiously listen. Give them an opportunity to respond by listening to them openly, without judgment, in hopes of understanding each other better. I shared these 4 steps with the authors of the book, The Neuroscience of Inclusion, who advised us during the creation of Inclusion 360. And they agreed that these steps were ideal because of the way that the brain is designed. The lower brain, often referred to as the reptilian brain, is responsible for the automatic responses of fight, flight, but also freeze. And this part of the brain is easily triggered whenever we experience any sort of physical threats, such as a snake, but also just as easily when we experience social or psychological threats, such as exclusion. The middle or limbic brain is involved in our emotional memory, and it's influential in our capacity to listen. For me, any time that I had a perceived threat of feeling excluded or my career being threatened, I would immediately be thrown into a freeze response. The higher brain, also called the neocortex, and in particular the prefrontal cortex, is responsible and is where our executive thought, reasoning, and it's where our ability to be inclusive lives. This part of the brain is most easily accessible when we are in a calm and non-threatening environment. Everything finally made sense on why I would freeze and stay silent in situations of exclusion. It was my lower brain trying to keep me safe. And all of my shame and guilt for not responding the way that I wish I could have in the moment dissolved. And my hope is that it does for you now too. The process of working through these 4 steps is a way to consciously bring the higher brain back online so you have the greatest opportunity to choose inclusive behaviors. It's important, though, that it not feel like we are attacking or calling people out when we use these 4 steps, because their lower brain can become easily triggered and their protective instincts will come into play too. This is why We must have these conversations in private and give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, you might be sitting here thinking, I'm the one that's caused an offense. I mean, at some point, we've all used a poor choice of words that didn't consider someone else's experiences and made them feel unintentionally excluded. Like the one time I sent a newsletter to 7,500 readers announcing my second pregnancy using the term knocked up. Yeah. I would quickly learn that a number of my readers were offended by this term, and after doing my own research to understand why, I used these same 4 steps to acknowledge my poor choice of words and to encourage feedback. In order to disrupt exclusionary behavior, we have to first disrupt our brain's tendency to fight, flight, or freeze. Only then can we access our higher brain's full capacity to leverage these skills and harness the courage to own our voice and help create the inclusive world we all deserve. Thank you.